go. Yeah, that's not exactly the way to start off a live stream, is it? Anyways. Oh, I got people messaging me now. Here I am in my humble abode. Go ahead, give us a thumbs up. I see someone watching there. I see some ears. That's real. So, I got a fresh coffee. Thanks for the thumbs up. Much appreciated. All right, so today, hi, Eric Cod. Hello, how are you? Yes, I'm live from my living room. Yep, I'm going to be doing a little reading today. There's Rio. Look at him, how handsome. Yeah, I'm going to do a little reading today, or I could just do this, but I think I am going to be doing a little reading. Good to see you too. That's nice. I got my new hoodie on. I just made this new hoodie for us, so that's pretty cool. First time wearing it. Fits nice, looks good. Yeah, it's got all the deal on it. I guess I could always just change the narrative on this video because people aren't going to want to watch me just... There's Rio. Look how handsome. Okay, I can listen today. Yeah. All right, so yeah, it's been a little bit. I've been... I did that last book there, Kevin Weeks's Brutal, about Whitey Bulger, Jimmy. But I'm going to make an attempt at Mafia Prince by Philip Leonetti. And of course, Scott Burnstein, who's super famous on YouTube there. We see him all the time. Be real. And Christopher Graziano. This is Mafia Prince. Inside America's most violent crime and the bloody fall of La Cosa Nostra. As I indicated in the, hello Rio, as I indicated in the comments, this is a real great book. This is one of it's a real classic to me. I'm going to shed a little light on the situation here. So dark here on Vancouver Island. It's always raining and overcast, especially cool. I don't know much about that. Yeah, well, it's Nicky Scarfo, and yeah, it's a real fascinating. When you go online, if you ever look it up, it'll have this image. So I'm going to use this image, but there's like one of the professional kind of companies that reads it, like some cool guy reads it, and it's always about, on this, he made the sign of a gun, because that's what he did. They just killed people. Like, they didn't screw around. They just killed them. Like, that was their way. And then it like kind of develops into a mob war between the Rico Bani faction, which is kind of interesting. So I'm going to start off here on page 7 with the foreword. Once again, Mafia Prince by Phil Leonetti and Scott Burnstein. Forward. They would meet in the Eden Rock Hotel in Miami, in the restaurant that looked out on the swimming pool. Meyer Lansky, the aging underworld genius, would be sitting at a table in the morning, in the corner, and here would come Nicky Scarfo, the Atlantic City gangster who was soon to be the most violent mafia boss in America, and Philip Leonetti, Scarfo's young nephew and future crime family underboss. My light is flickering. There we go. 3 generations of American mobsters sitting around talking. Lansky, white-haired and thin, in his 70s at the time. and fighting heart and stomach problems would dominate the conversations with stories about the old days. Scarfo, in his late 40s, his brown hair combed straight back, his eyes darting around the room, would nod and occasionally offer an opinion. And Leonetti, trim and movie star handsome, in his early 20s, would sit quietly, listening and learning. No one Now one of the most important mafia informants in history, Leonetti never said much during those meetings down in Miami. He was just happy to be there. He looked at Lansky the way others would look at DiMaggio, Caruso, or Hemingway. One of a kind, a man who defined the world in which he operated. Lansky was there at the beginning when it all started, when Cosa Nostra was formed. Leonetti, who rode to power with his uncle, and who for a time controlled the mob's rackets in Philadelphia and Atlantic City, is a man who helped bring it all to the end. This was back in the 1970s. Leonetti said several years ago, as he recounted those trips to Florida, anytime we went, my uncle would call and we'd go over and see Meyer. He'd be sitting there in the restaurant, him, a fellow by the name of Rosen, I won't say his first name, Mickey Weisberg. They used to get together there every day. It was like Meyer's hangout. They'd go there and play cards. Meyer liked us. He liked my uncle. So we'd sit around and he'd tell stories about the old days, about Benny and Charlie and how it used to be. Benny was Bugsy Siegel. Charlie was Charlie Lucky Luciano. Siegel, of course, brought the mob to Las Vegas. He built the Flamingo Casino in 1947, and that turned the desert into a money machine for the mob. Then he forgot who his partners were, and so he was killed. Years later, Lansky still talked about it. Meyer told us about how upset he was when Benny got killed. Leonetti said he really loved Benny, but he said Benny was robbing them guys and he wouldn't listen. I already see a typo that says Lilston, just an error. He said Benny never liked to listen to the Italians and that he thought the casino was his, which it wasn't. It was theirs. Benny would only listen to Meyer, and Meyer said he kept him under control the best he could. But when they decided to whack him, there was nothing he could do. It broke his heart when they killed him, but he couldn't stop it. It was business. Then he looked at my uncle and he said, Benny was a stone killer, Nick. You know, there's a lot of killers in the mafia. My uncle just nodded. Leonetti, who would eventually become one himself, that's part of his story. How he became a hitman for his uncle, how he turned on the man who raised him, and how he eventually ended up on the witness stand are all part of what this book is about. There has never been a mafia witness like Leonetti. Not Joe Valachi, not Vinnie Teresa, not Salvatore, Sammy the Bull Gravano. Leonetti is the essence of what the American mafia was in the 1980s and what it has become in the years since. His life was shaped, twisted, and nearly destroyed by it. His decision to cooperate has turned it upside down. Call it a story of family values gone awry, a bloody story of murder that ends with personal redemption. Murder, extortion, loan sharking, and gambling. Leonetti did it all. Then, faced with prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison and looking at the possibility that his own teenage son might be heading down the same road, he broke he broke with his uncle, with the mob, and with his life, or with the life. From the witness stand, he helped bring down high-ranking mob figures in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Boston, Pittsburgh, Hartford, and Philadelphia. Leaders of the Genovese, Gambino, Columbio, Patriarca, the Lucchese crime families are behind bars as a result. He was, without question, the reason Gravano agreed to testify, and consequently, the reason John Gotti was finally convicted. Leonetti's story is the saga of the American Mafia. It stretches from Lansky to Gotti, from Los Angeles to Palermo. It's a tale of money, murder, and treachery that puts the lie to the so-called men of honor. It's the view of a man sucked deep inside the underworld by the pull of a distorted sense of family, honor, and dignity. And it is a lesson in human redemption and second chances orchestrated by someone who had the intelligence, the strength, and the courage to break the chains that had bound him to the life. For months after his defection, Leonetti had been trying to explain to the FBI and the federal prosecutors what it meant to be part of that life. He wanted them to understand the twisted sense of values he had grown up with, about the Svengali-like influence his uncle, a surrogate father, in fact, he had held over him. It was like walking with the devil, he said, as agents and the government lawyers nodded and jotted down notes on the yellow legal pads they always brought in to his debriefing sessions. Then they'd go on to the next question, the next topic, and the next chapter in the saga of the rise and fall of the Scarfo crime family. It was clear to Leonetti that they really did understand that Cosa Nostra does, or what it does to a person, how it corrupts your soul. But Leonetti wanted them to understand. After 20 years, he didn't want to be part of it anymore. He was tired of the murders, worn out by the treachery and sickened by the deceit. But unless he could explain, unless he could show them, he knew he'd never be able to put it behind him. Finally, there was one moment when it all came together, when it all made sense. He was on the stand in federal court in Philadelphia, making his debut as a witness. This was in January of 1990, 6 months after he had broken with the mob and started talking with the feds. He was testifying about 4 of his major associates, detailing the operations of the crime family he and Scarfo had once controlled, and implicating the 4 mobsters sitting at the defense table in the organization's activities. Dressed in a blue blazer and gray slacks, with a dark crewneck sweater over a white shirt and tie, he looked more like an accountant than a hitman. But his testimony was proving to be as deadly in court as his actions had been in the underworld. Leonetti would admit his involvement in 10 gangland murders And he testified about the secret organization, the code of silence, the extortions, the loan sharking, and the gambling. On cross-examination of one of the defense attorneys set out to unnerve him, asking sarcastically if he knew what it means to be ruthless. Leonetti paused briefly to think about the question. That's when it all came together. That's when he was able to make them see. That's when it, in its own perverse way, it made sense. I know what it means to be ruthless, he said in that quiet, firm voice that had the jurors hanging on every word. But I don't remember ever doing anything. As a matter of fact, I know for sure I never did nothing ruthless besides, well, I would kill people. But that's our life. That's what we do. In that life, there was no moral dilemma, no debate over what it meant to murder another human being, no question of right or wrong. It was simply Cosa Nostra. Phil Leonetti had finally made them all understand he has left the life far behind him. This is the story of where he is, and how he got there. That was a quote from George Anastasia, a crime writer from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'll carry on with the preface. Somewhere near the Atlantic Ocean, spring 2011. He was tan and fit and wearing a dark windbreaker type jacket over neatly pressed dress slacks with highly polished black Italian loafers. His gray hair was neatly styled, combed straight back. He was wearing a pair of black designer sunglasses. The man seated inside an upscale hotel lobby bar looked like a country club golf pro and not a psychopathic mafia killer worthy of the moniker Crazy Phil. Soft-spoken and polite, he was understated and handsome, and carried himself with an air of confidence. After exchanging pleasantries, he removed his sunglasses and said, "You have to understand, I come from a very different world than you guys." His tone was soft as he spoke, his eyes focused. "We live by a very different set of rules. In the Cosa Nostra, if you break the rules, you get this," he said, shaping his hand like a gun and pointing it toward the ground. And I broke out, and I broke the biggest rule of them all. I betrayed my oath. Phil Leonetti was right there in plain sight, more than 2 decades removed from his life as the underboss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. Although he had once been a shark, a great white, swimming in the sea of other deadly and bloodthirsty sharks, he now appeared simply as a man with a story to tell. Over the next 3 days, inside a plush suite, high above the sandy beaches overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, Phil Leonetti would provide chapter and verse of his life, both inside the mob and out. To this book's co-authors, this was our first time meeting Leonetti face to face, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the next year, we would meet several times in major cities all over the United States, with our final meeting taking place in winter of 2012 back in Atlantic City, just steps away from the Georgia Avenue compound where it had all started. This is the definitive inside story of the bloody rise and treacherous fall of one of the most ruthless mafia empires in American history. At the epicenter are two men, Phil Leonetti and his uncle Nicodemo Scarfo, Crazy Phil and Little Nicky. What you are about to read in there is their story, told in part by the co-authors, based on extensive research and personal interviews, and also by Philip in his own voice. Different typefaces are used throughout to distinguish the two. It is part Godfather and part Goodfellas with shades of Casino, Donnie Brasco, and The Sopranos spliced throughout. But this isn't a Hollywood movie or television show. This is the real thing. Yeah, so that's, I'd be up at, I've come up to Act 1, Little Nicky and Crazy Phil on page 13. I like a book too that's in larger print, which is kind of nice. They break it down with different titles throughout in parts, so it's not easy reading. I'm going to carry on. I'm going to go for an hour. If anybody wants to talk about anything, or I see two people watching, if that other person wants to give me a like, go ahead. Be appreciated. It's trying to relax today, so I thought I would take my mind off with a little reading, and I've got a pile of books here I just like chomping to get to. So without further ado, I'll carry on. Act 1, Little Nicky and Crazy Phil, December 16th, 1979. It was a cold winter afternoon, the type of day where the frigid air could literally take a man's breath away. But on this day, it wouldn't be Mother Nature performing the daunting task. It would be a 26-year-old mob killer with ice in his veins and orders to kill named Philip Leonetti, whose name Crazy Phil said it all. As the unmistakable sounds of the powerful and unforgiving white-capped waves pounding the shoreline and a few feet away punctuated the crisp air on the dreary day, there was no force where more powerful and unforgiving, more omnipresent in Phil Leonetti's life than that of his 50-year-old uncle, Nicodemo Scarfo, the man who had raised him like a son after his own father had abandoned him as a child and had turned him into a heartless, stone-cold killer. Scarfo, who was nicknamed Little Nicky, stood 5'5" and weighed a mere 135 pounds. While he may have been small in stature, Scarfo had earned a reputation for committing acts of unspeakable violence that had made him a giant in the criminal underworld. By 1979, he was the Philadelphia mob's fastest rising star and had become the de facto boss of the boardwalk in Atlantic City, which, with the advent of casino gambling a year before, had become a boomtown for the mob. His beloved nephew, Philip Leonetti, had become his right-hand man, his most trusted aide, and his most able killer. During the late 1970s, in the burgeoning Atlantic City underworld, the ground shook with when and where Little Nicky and Crazy Phil walked. Maybe. I know. I just got struck yesterday. I got told that I was like because I'm not even going to say what I said. It wasn't even anything that I said. I thought that too, like a heads up, but they know what it is. It's, yeah. Next, I will do that the next chapter. It was, in the next post. It was common knowledge to those doing business in Atlantic City that the equally feared and respected Scarfo and Leonetti were not to be, yeah, like, see, effed with. So when a young mob associate named Vincent Falcone drew the ire of the extremely volatile Scarfo, little Nicky decided that the penalty would be death, and Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti would be the executioner. Philip Leonetti spoke to Vincent Falcone as the two men stood in the kitchen of a friend's beachfront home in Margate, an upscale New York or a New Jersey beach community a few short miles south of Atlantic City. Come on, Vince, let's make some drinks. Inside the living room, just a few feet away, sat Nicky Scarfo, his reading glasses perched low on his nose and his Italian leather shoes resting comfortably on a coffee table as he perused the Sunday edition of the Atlantic City Press while watching the Philadelphia Eagles battle the Houston Oilers, who were led by future Hall of Fame running back Earl Campbell. Vince, I always remember this line, Vince, bring me a cutty and some water, said Scarfo in his trademark high-pitched voice as Falcone, I think it's Falcone, but I'm going to call him Falcone, set out two glasses for the boss, one to be filled with Cutty Sark, the blended Scotch whiskey favored by Scarfo, and the other to be filled with water that little Nicky used to dilute his drink. Joining the trio of Scarfo, Leonetti, and Falcone on this fateful afternoon were two aspiring mobsters, young wannabes, wise guys who, like Leonetti and Falcone, were members of Nicky Scarfo's Atlantic City crew. The five men had gathered to have a pre-holiday celebration. Christmas, after all, was just 9 days away. But there was nothing festive about what would happen next. After placing the bottle of scotch that his uncle had requested on the kitchen table, the 26-year-old Leonetti nodded towards Falcone. Vince, get me some ice. The unsuspecting Falcone nodded in agreement and walked toward the refrigerator, turning his back to Leonetti and the others as he did. Leonetti immediately reached into his black leather jacket and pulled out a small .32 caliber handgun that had been tucked in his waistband. Without hesitation, he moved swiftly behind Falcone and pressed the handgun to the back of his head, directly behind his right ear, and squeezed the trigger. Boom! Propelled by the blast, Falcone flew forward and collided with the refrigerator, awkwardly landing on his back as a pool of blood began to turn the cheap linoleum floor a dark shade of crimson. Nicky Scarfo, apparently no longer interested in the Eagles game, got up from the couch and, without saying a word, walked into the kitchen and kneeled down next to Falcone's mortally wounded body, pressing his ear to Falcone's heart to listen for a heartbeat. He's still alive, Scarfo said to Leonetti. He was standing over Falcone's body, the gun still firmly gripped in his right hand. Give him another one, said Scarfo, who added, right here, and as he pointed to Falcone's heart. As little Nicky knelt, Little Nicky knelt beside the fallen Vincent Falcone. Crazy Phil pumped another shot into his heart and at point blank range. Boom! Causing Falcone's body to violently jerk as the bullet ripped through his chest and immediately ended his life. "The big shot's dead," said a jubilant Nicky Scarfo, rising to his feet, belittling the dead man as a piece of shit cocksucker, as he said. Philip Leonetti, still holding the pistol, turned to him, one of the other men in the kitchen, a close friend of Falcone's, fixed an icy stare on him and said, "He was a no good motherfucker. I wish I could bring him back to life so I could kill him again." It wasn't the first time that Scarfo and Leonetti had killed together, and it wouldn't be the last. Over the next decade, they orchestrated or personally carried out 20 more killings, another half dozen or so that predated the Falcone murder would help define their reign as two of the most notorious gangsters of the 20th century. Three things figured prominently in many of the murders: money, power, and Atlantic City. Eventually, Little Nicky and Crazy Phil had them all the money, all the power, and absolute control over Atlantic City. They had ascended from a lowly mob street crew loaning money to each strapped gambler and gamblers. No, see, that doesn't say each. It says cash. It looks like each, though. I'm going to start that again. They had ascended from a lowly mob street crew, loaning money to cash-strapped gamblers and shaking down two-bit wise guys, and risen to the pantheon of organized crime. They were the boss and underboss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob, the CEO and COO of the nation's bloodiest and most ruthless mafia empire. 10 years after the Falcone murder, the life of crime, power, and big money was all over for Little Nicky and Crazy Phil. But in many ways, life was just beginning for Phil Leonetti. Yep, we're into it 33 minutes. I'm going to keep going here. This next is called In Plain Sight. On May 1st, 2011, the world was transfixed by the news that Osama bin Laden, the evil mastermind of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and undoubtedly the most hated man on the planet, had been hunted down and killed by members of the United States military's ultra-elite Navy SEAL Team 6. For most of the decade leading up to bin Laden's long overdue execution, it was widely believed that the world's most notorious terrorist was living inside a network of hidden mountain caves in the Afghan region of Tora Bora under the protection of the terror-friendly warlords who control the area. But when SEAL Team 6 made its now infamous trip to Atlantic City, that is when they called the hit on bin Laden, they did not find him inside a dusty mountain cave, but rather on the third floor of a carefully built $1 million high-security compound in Abbottabad in Pakistan, less than 800 yards from a prestigious Pakistani military academy, the country's equivalent to West Point. Despite a $25 million bounty on his head, the 6'4" bin Laden was hiding in plain sight. Within hours of his bullet-ridden corpse being ceremoniously dumped into the Indian Ocean, the FBI removed him from atop its 10 most wanted list, replacing him with the notorious South Boston Irish mob boss and former FBI informant James Whitey Bulger. A nice segue from my last book. Suspected in more than 20 killings, the ruthless and cunning Bulger had vanished without a trace in December '94 after being tipped off by a corrupt FBI agent and that the feds were preparing to wipe out his gang with a massive indictment under the RICO, Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act. As the international FBI manhunt for Bulger intensified, credible sightings were reported in South Florida, New York, London, and Chicago from tipsters looking to cash in on a $2 million reward. Additional confirmed sightings in nondescript podunk towns like Grand Isle, Louisiana, Sloan, Iowa, Sheridan in Wyoming, and Fountain Valley, California, affirmed the belief that Bulger was traveling with ease, always managing to stay one step ahead of the egg-faced FBI agents who remained hot on his trail. It appeared that Whitey Bulger was everywhere, yet nowhere, and at the same time that would all change during the early evening hours of June 22nd, 2011, when FBI agents and the U.S. Marshals acting on a tip found the 81-year-old fugitive gangster holed up in a posh seaside condominium in Santa Monica, California, that was located 3 blocks from the Pacific Ocean and the scenic open-air 3rd Street Promenade, the house that houses dozens of boutique-type shops and trendy restaurants. Like bin Laden in Pakistan, the elusive Whitey Bulger was hiding in plain sight. As we watched the television coverage and read the newspaper accounts surrounding their respective captures, we wondered where in the world was Phil Leonetti hiding. I wonder where he's hiding now, because all the other guys are out telling their stories. I'm sure he could be telling his too. Leonetti, the one-time underboss of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob, nicknamed Crazy Phil, was the crown prince of the Mafia during the mob's long-lost 1980s heyday in the Northeast United States. I always like sneezing these days. It's so dusty, I guess, from the wood stove. A stone-cold killer. He was the nephew and second in command of Nicodema, Little Nicky Scarfo, one of the most bloodthirsty and ruthless crime bosses in the history of organized crime. If Leonetti was the prince, Scarfo was undoubtedly the king of Atlantic City and the Philadelphia mob. And together they ran their mafia empire from their headquarters on Georgia Avenue in the Duckstown neighborhood of Atlantic City. Less than 3 blocks from the world famous boardwalk and the glitz and glamour of the city's neon-lit casinos, all of which they controlled with an iron fist. A former associate turned government witness once described Scarfo by saying, if Nicky had as much power as Hitler, he would have outdid him, and also said that Leonetti was 100% Scarfo. He was just as ruthless and deadly as his uncle. Murder, mayhem, and wanton violence became the benchmark of the mob under Little Nicky and Crazy Phil, with more than 24 mob killings punctuating what would become one of the most volatile and tumultuous periods in the long and celebrated U.S. history of the Mafia, or its more proper name, La Cosa Nostra, which is Italian for this thing of ours. Leonetti himself was convicted of participating in 10 gangland killings. Millions of dollars in cash poured in from traditional mob rackets like gambling, loan sharking, and extortion, while millions more came in from Scarfo's very lucrative and underworld street tax and a seemingly limitless skim from Local 54, Atlantic City's largest casino union, which Scarfo and Leonetti treated like their own petty cash fund. I always wondered about that too. I was in a union. Scarfo and Leonetti worked closely with the New York crime bosses, including Vincent the Chin Gigante, the leader of the powerful Genovese crime family, who stymied law enforcement for decades by pretending to be crazy, walking around his Greenwich Village neighborhood in a bathrobe, mumbling to himself and the dapper Don John Gotti, the ambitious Gambino crime family boss known for his $2,000 suits. Scarfo and Leonetti were recognized as elite mafioso, highly regarded and equally feared in mob circles throughout the United States. In other words, they were untouchable, or so it seemed. As Scarfo and Leonetti grew in power, so did the efforts of the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice to stop them. They had become public enemy number one and public enemy number two. When it was over, the Scarfo organization would be decimated, and Little Nicky, its supreme leader and Lord High Executioner, would be sentenced to life in prison, narrowly escaping the death penalty, following a series of convictions in both state and federal courts in the late 1980s that rocked the foundation of the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob. The trials featured testimony from several mob turncoats who had betrayed their sacred oath of omerta and agreed to cooperate with the government by testifying against Scarfo, Leonetti, and 15 of their men. Scarfo, now 83, remains behind bars, and as this book is being published, currently housed at the high security U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta, after spending the last 25 years in various maximum security federal penitentiaries all over the United States. Leonetti would receive 45 years in prison for his life of crime, which included convictions for murder and racketeering. But Crazy Phil would only serve 5 years, 5 months, and 5 days behind bars after agreeing to cooperate with the federal government in 1989, betraying his uncle Nicky Scarfo and his blood oath to La Cosa Nostra, to which he had sworn his undying allegiance less than a decade earlier. At the age of 36, Phil Leonetti, who had become the youngest underboss in the history of La Cosa Nostra, gained the more dubious distinction of being the highest ranking member of the nationwide crime syndicate to flip and cooperate with the government. I was waiting for Rio to start chewing his bone. The impact of the underworld was akin to that of a plane flying into the World Trade Center before 9/11. It was unfathomable, but it happened, and the Philadelphia Atlantic City mob would be left in tatters, the infrastructure so badly damaged that more than 2 decades later, it has yet to fully recover. Leonetti, the government witness, proved to be just as deadly as Leonetti, the mob killer. Dozens of mobsters and associates were convicted as a direct result of Leonetti's testimony, and he would figure prominently in the demise of the New York mob bosses Vincent the Chin Gigante and John Gotti, and more importantly, the Cosa Nostra itself. The demise, yeah. When he was done testifying, Leonetti would settle into a life inside the confines of a top secret world, the witness security wing of a remote federal prison tucked away in a dusty Arizona desert. Joining him would be Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, the former underboss of New York City's Gambino crime family, who followed Leonetti's lead and has also defected from the Cosa Nostra. Ironically, as Leonetti and Gravano enjoyed life together in the Arizona sun, reminiscing about their glory days in the mob, Nicky Scarfo and John Gotti, the bosses they betrayed, were rotting, locked down for all but a half hour of each day inside 8 by 10-foot concrete cells in one of the nation's toughest federal prisons located in Marion, Illinois. By the early 1990s, the U.S. La Cosa Nostra was still a deadly nationwide criminal organization, but it had become a shell of its former self. Leonetti, the man who brought the mob to its knees, was released from prison and disappeared into the witness protection program with a new identity and a new lease on life. Not yet 40 years old, Philip Leonetti had to start over and completely reinvent himself, and he couldn't have been happier to do so. While Gigante and Gotti would go on to die inside the federal prison that became their homes, Leonetti's uncle Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo would remain alive and well in his. Scarfo has vowed revenge and has openly plotted to kill his once beloved nephew and his entire family. The evil, vindictive Scarfo would place $500,000 bounties on his nephew's head, and a bounty which, according to the FBI, still stands to the day. A letter written in the mid 1990s by a deranged Scarfo to his own mother, Leonetti's grandfather, paints a chilling picture as the jail mob boss makes a not so veiled series of threats against Leonetti and his mother, Nancy, who is Scarfo's own sister. I will never forget them, animals, and what they did to this family, but you still love them, which makes me know you lost your mind. I want you to live forever, but I want you to have your sense so you could see what it is going to happen to those wild animals. If you love that witch, you better say all your prayers for her and her crazy son, because I don't need no prayers. And besides all of that, F God too. In other words, or in another letter, this one intercepted by the Bureau of Prisons, a tamer Scarfo wrote the following to one of his lawyers. I maintain myself to see these people suffer one day. This is what keeps me going. What keeps Phil Leonetti going is the new life that he started with his family far away from Atlantic City and the mob, and for the last decade or so, away from the watchful eye of the FBI and the U.S. Marshals who run the witness protection program. Hiding from both the mob and the government, Phil Leonetti, who would come to learn was like Osama bin Laden and Whitey Bulger, hiding in plain sight. Well, that looks like I'm almost at an hour, and it looks like I'm kind of at a. Oh, I could go another. Maybe I'll go. Oh yeah, Eric Hyde. Let's go another couple pages, and I'll just take it over an hour. La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours. What we know as the Mafia in the United States is actually an offshoot of several different secret societies in Europe that date back centuries. The most prominent of these sects were the Sicilian Mafia, the Ndrangheta, and the Camorra, which originated in Naples. Originally, the intent of such organizations was not so criminal. They existed to protect the common citizen of these regions from a corrupt and oppressive government that did little to nothing to look out for the interest of the regular working man. Over time, as these groups evolved, they became sophisticated criminal organizations. As Italian and Sicilian immigrants flooded the streets of major American cities in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a number of loosely organized incarnations of these secret societies began to take form, making their presence felt in the ethnic neighborhoods across the country. Street gangs with ties to the old country set up shop and operated a vast array of rackets. The onset of Prohibition in the 1920s made many early mobsters incredibly wealthy, as their street gangs spearheaded an underworld movement supplying illegal liquor thirsty public to a thirsty public, while causing heaps of newspaper headlines and bloodshed as they battled over turf. Nowhere was this more evident than in Chicago, where Al Capone, the most celebrated gangster of his era, became the face of organized crime in the United States. At first, there was little to no connection between the various burgeoning crime conglomerates operating throughout the United States. A move towards consolidation slowly began to take form as the bosses began to recognize that true power and strength could only be accomplished by establishing a nationwide crime syndicate. The American Organized Crime Syndicate would come to be known as La Cosa Nostra, which in Italian means this thing of ours. The inaugural summit of this newly organized syndicate would feature the nation's top gangland bosses, nearly 50 men operating street rackets in U.S. cities from coast to coast. The meeting took place in the spring of 1929 at the legendary Ritz Hotel on the world's famous Atlantic City boardwalk. Atlantic City, known as the world's playground, was riddled with vice and became the original Sin City long before modern day Las Vegas was even contemplated. I gotta go there. Check it out. Backroom casinos show girls looking for a quick buck, and a non-stop flow of booze during Prohibition made Atlantic City the perfect choice for such a gathering. 2 years later, in 1931, the modern American Mafia was created in the aftermath of a carnage-filled mob war in New York City that pitted a group of old-school underworld leaders known as Mustache Pete's against a group of young and hungry underworld visionaries led by a man born Salvatore Lucania, who would later come to be known as Charles Lucky Luciano. With Luciano's group emerging victorious, the ambitious new godfather called a meeting of fellow mob leaders to Chicago and laid out his vision for what would become La Cosa Nostra. Luciano proposed a nationwide crime syndicate made up of regional mob factions called families, which would be overseen and governed by a board of directors known as the Commission. The Commission would be comprised of only the most powerful and respected mob dons, men like Luciano and Capone. The syndicate and its rules would be paramilitary in structure. Each family would be headed by a boss, an underboss, and a consigliere or counselor. The hierarchy of the family would also include a cadre of capos or captains who would each be responsible for a crew of family soldiers and associates. Attendees of Luciano's underworld conference held at the Blackstone Hotel in the heart of the Windy City's most famous Miracle Mile on Michigan Avenue, unanimously agreed to the proposal and unanimously pledged their allegiance to the newly established La Cosa Nostra. Following the meeting of the nation's top criminal minds in Chicago, 26 American mob families were formed. There was one for almost every major city in the country, with the New York and Chicago mobs being the most prominent. In the city of Philadelphia, John Avina, a longtime lieutenant under Prohibition-era crime lord Salvatore Sabella, was named the city's first modern-day mob boss. Sabella had sided against Luciano in his war with the Mustache Pete's, and as a result was told to step down and turn over the reins to Avina. From the moment he assumed power, Avina butted heads with a former ally and one-time Sabella lieutenant named Joseph Dovey. Feeling slighted by Avina's promotion, Dovey immediately challenged his authority. The two men and their respective factions battled for control on the streets for nearly 5 years, a war that culminated with Avina, the boss, being killed in 1936. Dovey took control of the Philadelphia Mafia for the next decade, expanding the crime family's territorial reach into parts of neighboring states, New Jersey and Delaware. When Dovey died from natural causes in 1946, Joe Ida, another former Sabella disciple, was named the city's new Don. Ida ruled unfettered for another decade, but his reign would end following his arrest at the infamous Appalachian Mob Summit in 1957, which ultimately led to his deportation. Like the Atlantic City Conference in 1929, the Appalachian Summit was designed to bring together the top gangland leaders in the nation, but many of these men were arrested as they converged on the upstate New York hunting lodge cottage, where the conference was to take place. Law enforcement had been tipped off and was lying in wait as the unsuspecting mobsters converged on the location. For a brief period of time following Ida's deportation, Antonio Mr. Miggs Polina was named his successor, but Polina quickly fell out of favor with those within the organization by plotting the murder of a popular mob captain born Angelo Annaloro, who would come to be known as Angelo Bruno. Getting wind of Polina's plan to murder him, Bruno, a cunning and even-tempered gangster, turned the tables on Mr. Miggs, using his many connections to the New York underworld, which included a deep personal relationship with the powerful Carlo Gambino. Bruno got the commission to depose Polina, and Bruno was anointed his successor. Showing a level of mercy not often displayed by men in his position, Bruno spared Polina's life. Instead of killing him for his indiscretion, he banished the defeated former boss into retirement. The controversial move earned Bruno the nickname the Docile Don. What the future would hold for Bruno and those operating in and around Philadelphia, the Philadelphia mob, which now included rackets in neighboring Atlantic City, would be anything but docile, especially once Nicky Scarfo and his nephew Phil Leonetti gained control. All right, so I think that's about it. I just made it past an hour and two. If anyone's still watching, I see one focus, or somebody is. That was interesting, a little bit of history there. Easy reading too. I hope I'm reading okay. I do my best, like I say. So today, yeah, I cracked the book, and I'm going to do it every day. Probably read some more. Oh, hi, Erica. Wonderful. Now we can chat. I'm going to do it every day again until I got her nailed. I was saying to a friend there, I got a stack of books I'm kind of always perusing that I enjoy, and most of them are another one I'm really probably going to do right after this is Sammy the Bull, Under Boss. Really good book I've read before, and if you really want, I like it how they're delving into the history of it too. I've listened to Mafia Prince before myself, but I've never read it. I've read Underboss. I've got Murder Machine 2, Roy DeMeo, which would be, according to Murder Machine's cover, it's the scariest book ever about the mob. I've got The Life and Crimes of Vincent the Chin Gigante 2. I was reading that one, but I'm not now. I've got, this would be kind of cool too. This is the Legendary Man of Honor. That's a real good book, like, unfortunately, this guy, Joe Bonanno, unfortunately, he wrote this book, he wrote a book and like gave it all away because he wanted to tell the world how awesome it all was, you know. So anyway, yeah. So that was my introduction and whatnot. A little bit of reading today, over an hour today of Phil Leonetti's Mafia prints. Is pretty riveting. And yeah, we, like being a Canadian and that, we don't know much about, as much about Americans' history, I guess, like, because we only know what we get on TV and we get a lot of American history, I guess. But I've always followed that. I didn't know where Atlantic City was. I don't know what that is. I thought it was like in New Jersey or something. Anyway, and you always, all these books, it's funny too how they're so related to the Sopranos show too, like even that, what I was just reading about there, their little summit that they got together at, that reminds me of that time. And you hit the Irish American with Jimmy. Yeah, that's right. With Kevin Weeks is brutal. I like kind of how they're segueing together a mention of, because Whitey was Jimmy, was, yeah, I was going to say, in that book, that'd be kind of if you did drink, I don't drink, but that would be kind of a fun drinking game. Every time you say Jimmy in that book, it's like, holy, every other word is Jimmy. Jimmy this, Jimmy that. Anyway, so not to carry on too long, because I hope people do watch this, and I don't know if the reading's any good. I try my best. I found, like, I talked to Loomis Santoro there a couple times about it, because he reads too, and how you see words that, or maybe not see the word, but maybe the word, like a similar word, appears comes out of your mouth for whatever reason when it's not even there, So, and to be able to read, to flow, like I've heard the way they read like, and it does, they did detail that, how they have different font for Nikki and for Phil, so that you can kind of alter your voice, I guess. Anyways, I was smoking a little, what do I got going here today? I got some, it's called garlic bread from, well, that's WMMC, so that's Whistler Mountain Marijuana Company up in Whistler, BC. It's a big ski resort up there where all the cool dudes live, cool people live. I will be on the road if you are. You'll be able to watch it on replay. I'll be throwing all these in a playlist so that they can be watched over and over again for years and years to come. I'm already on it here. Nice. Where are you going to be driving to? Around America? My friend Pixie is messaging me. Anyway. So yeah, life carries on here. We're getting to the end of winter, hopefully. I know it's only January 11th, but I see guys on the mainland are riding Ozarks. Nice. That's cool. That's cool. I'd love to go there. Yeah, I'd love to check that out one day. Bet you it's humid there in the summer or something like that, is it? Hot, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, I know I haven't really done any videos since the Remembrance Day one either, eh? Like, because that was kind of epic. I don't know, I just, oh yeah, it gets hot, eh? Yeah. Humid? Yeah, the Ozarks. That's like mountains, right? Like hillbillies and stuff. Like, if that's what I've heard. Again, I only know what I know from movies and what I read and whatnot. Like, was there any, like, is that like Hatfields and McCoys or something like that? Is it? Hatfields, McCoys? Ow. Jeez. Those dogs of mine, man, their heads are like hammers. Just got slammed in the knee by one. Well, that's nice. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here anyways. That's an hour and 10 minutes of discussion and reading. And one day, I think it would be really cool to I see Scott Burnstein actually online a lot, like, on YouTube. I could have him on a StreamYard, and yeah, we could discuss the book when I'm finished it. I thought it'd be cool to have on Kevin Weeks too, and discuss the book, what he's doing now in his life. And man, that guy is like, he would be somebody like you could ask some serious questions to, that Kevin Weeks guy, man. He was there for real. He beat the crap out of a lot of people, man. Like, that guy is hardcore, like, I found it funny too in the movie how they portrayed him almost like punch drunk, I guess. I just watched the movie Black Mass there recently, and I rented it, and I found it kind of almost like that Johnny Depp's character was, he really did become, like, he looked identical to him, he acted like him, he almost had like a mythical type, like almost like a supernatural type persona. But I guess, probably what Bulger did, but with the big high collars and that, and the hair, and always like standing on top of things, and he became like almost like a Dracula like figure, I thought, in the movie, which were like almost like a, how do you get away with that? I know, like, back in the day they didn't have video surveillance and that, but like still, like, how do, like, anybody would recognize that guy? Hey, look, it's Whitey Bulger with an M14 or a Mini 14, like shooting up a car. How do you get away with that? I guess you don't. He didn't eventually. I mean, he was on the run for 16 years. That's insane. But like he alluded to in this book, nice segue again, how's he like hidden in plain sight, like Phil Leonetti? Okay, well, that's it. I am out for today. I'm giving this book a 5 by 5 already, and really enjoying it. It's going to get more and more interesting. So thanks for watching, Eric Cod, and anybody else that watches this, to the end, if you get there, be sure to give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and share this video. All right, I'm out.